Welcome to Natsat. My name is Paul Spanos, and today the topic is about persecution, specifically church persecution around the world. And we have an expert with us, Elizabeth Kendal.
Hello, Paul.
Welcome to our program. And just for our viewers, just to get to know you, how long you've been involved with the persecuted church?
Well, I've been doing this for about 16, 17 years.
Oh, that's quite long. What really made you to deal with the subject? It's not an easy subject to deal with, really.
Yes, well, for quite some time I'd been praying to the Lord to give me a ministry. I really wanted to serve Him in a particular way. I was raising 4 children. I knew that was a ministry, but I wanted something else. One day I saw on the news a tiny little clip, a soundbite on SBS News. The Coptic Association, the Copts, the Christians of Egypt, had a march in the main street of Sydney to protest this terrible persecution of Christians in Upper Egypt. And that was it. The news wasn't even about the persecution. It was about the march. And it's as if God caught me in that moment. And I just had to find out what had happened. And I found it very difficult to find information. And when I uncovered it, there'd been a murder in Upper Egypt where 2 Christians had been murdered. Eyewitnesses said it was by a particular Muslim gang. Their bodies had been dropped back into the village, and in order to prevent there from being any sort of trouble, the Egyptian authorities had gone in, rounded up all the Christians of this Christian village, El Koshe, and had taken them into custody, and they were torturing them and beating them, even their children, to get a confession from someone.
How did you find that information at the time?
Well, I had to really search quite hard, and I eventually got all the way to the head of the International Coptic Association in Washington, D.C.
That means a lot of information, though. Now you're telling me that a lot of information in relation to the persecuted church is hidden.
Exactly, and that's what really struck me, because I thought to myself, if this was 1,000 journalists that had been rounded up and beaten, we'd all know about it. If it was 1,000 politicians, we'd know about it, but then it's not newsworthy because they're Christians. And I remember standing in my kitchen, I was preparing dinner and I was thinking, and I realised that God was calling me at this point to devote my life to making sure people know what's happening to their brothers and sisters over the world, because the media you can't rely on the media to tell you. We need someone to tell us.
Obviously, the media are very, very selective to what they want to portray as news, isn't it?
Yes.
But it is not really justice that they bring all the suffering parts of the community in public. And then what happened what happened to you when you heard that story? What happened to you? How come that subject was really capturing you?
It absolutely captured me, and I know that God infused me at that point with this deep indignation that this could happen to Christians, and that the world wouldn't care, and the church wouldn't know. I was inflamed with passion about it. So I knew that this was God's calling upon my life, and I just devoted myself. I started writing, and then I was picked up by the World Evangelical Alliance. And I started, it was a wonderful thing, because the General Secretary of the Religious Liberty Commission had been praying for quite some time that God would provide them with a worker to run a prayer ministry. And here I am in Melbourne, a single mother of all things in Melbourne, praying that God will give me a ministry. And this gentleman in England, he had been praying, and he just took this as God's provision, which I think is remarkable, that he would have that sort of faith.
It's amazing.
And I was given the job.
And today, Elizabeth, are you involved with any organization?
Yes, I worked for World Evangelical Alliance for over 12 years, and
Yes.
I resigned from them in April 2009 and went independent and continued doing all the same work I was doing, but through my own blogs.
Okay.
So my Religious Liberty Monitoring blog, a Religious Liberty Prayer Bulletin blog, and a site I call Critical Prayer Requests.
Okay.
So that's CPR.
Right.
Yes, and that's
How appropriate.
that's right, for mainly for International Day of Prayer for the persecuted church, but any time they can be used. So critical prayer requests for nations where Christians are persecuted. And I work as the Director of Advocacy for Christian Faith and Freedom, which is a Canberra-based lobby group.
All right. And for the last 10 years, what is the trend about the persecuted church?
Well, things are getting worse. They're getting a lot worse very, very quickly.
Okay.
We've got rising religious nationalism in countries like India especially, and Sri Lanka, and to a lesser extent in Nepal. India is the worst. We now have a Hindu nationalist government in Nepal. So they really, in India rather, so they actually advocate like a religious apartheid. If you're Indian, you're supposed to be Hindu. Otherwise you are a second-class citizen and regarded as a traitor and not really fully Indian. And persecution can be quite severe in India.
Is it a specific area in India, or
it's all over? All over. Yeah,
wow.
It used to be mainly in the tribal belt,
but
it's increasingly all over India. We've seen a real escalation, of course, in Islamic radicalisation. And the more radicalised Muslims get, the more they hate Christians. So we've seen a great uptick in persecution of Christians. We've seen a proliferation of Islamic terrorist organisations and militant groups. So like mass violence against Christians has escalated. And one thing when I first started...
very open, aren't they?
Oh, totally open.
Blunt.
Yes, and when I first started doing this work, I'd report on an incident of violence here or an incident of violence there. Now I'm increasingly faced with pogroms and ethnic cleansing and attempted genocides of whole peoples. It's on a different scale. And we're seeing the influence that the West has, or the ability that the West has to influence events, has virtually evaporated. So it's like the gloves are off.
That's very, very interesting situation you touched just now. But we're going to come back shortly after the break. Thanks for staying with us. We will be back shortly. Welcome back to NatChat, and we continue our conversation about persecuted church with Elizabeth Kendal, who is a researcher and an author. And let's pick up one country, which is Iraq. What is happening over there in relation to the subject we talk about, persecuted church?
Well, the situation in Iraq is really severe right at the moment. We've got the development of, this group, Islamic State. They were originally the Islamic State of Iraq. Then they developed to become the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham, which is a greater Syria. So ISIS or ISIL. And they seized control of Raqqa, which is in northern Syria, and established a capital there. From there they came back into Iraq. They exploded in size by coming into Anbar province, where there's lots and lots of unemployed Sunni activists trying to fight against the government of al-Maliki. So when ISIS came back into Iraq, they all joined ISIS, and it grew massively. The ISIS then went north up into Nineveh, which is in northern Iraq, and they took over Mosul. And this is the heartland of the Christian people of Iraq. This is the heartland of the Assyrian nation. You remember Jonah went to Nineveh.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
And the people of Nineveh began following the one true God. Well, they continued to follow the one true God. They established relationship with Israel. And when Jesus rose from the dead, they believed.
Yes.
And the Assyrian Church of the East was the first denomination ever established.
Okay. And now that expansion of ISIS in the area is due to what?
Well, they're looking at taking over the whole region. They have huge plans to make this enormous Islamic caliphate, probably something much the size that the Ottoman Empire was, and even bigger and expanding.
And I can see that the methods, well, we can see what the media tells us, the fear, they use fear quite a bit, isn't it?
Yes.
And what do they do to the churches? What is happening in a practical sense?
Well, in Raqqa, in Syria, where they've established their capital, most of the Christians had already fled. Okay. I think there were only about 100 families left when ISIS got there. Okay. Now there's about 20. Those Christians are being really severely persecuted. They have to follow all Islamic laws. They have to pay protection money. Twice a year they have to pay for their right to life. And the brutality in Raqqa has been appalling. Okay. In Mosul, what they did was, the first thing they did was ISIS established itself in the city, and then it tried to take Baghdad and couldn't, so it came back and it purged the Christians out of Mosul. So they marked the homes. They marked the homes with a big red letter N, the Arabic letter Nun, for Nasriya, which means a follower of the Nazarene. And they wrote in black, property of the Islamic State, and gave them 24 hours to get out. So Mosul was emptied of Christians. It's appalling.
And the state itself, Iraq, as a government, can't use a simple civil rights law.
No. Well, ISIS is a law unto itself. And Iraq has become completely fragmented along sectarian lines. So the army was Shia. And when ISIS came in, and ISIS is Sunni, the Shia ran for their lives. They weren't going to defend Christians in front of ISIS. Right. So the Christians were just left. And then after they'd purged Mosul of the Christians, they made an advance on Kirkuk, where all the oil is. And to get there, they overran what is Iraq's largest Assyrian city, Baghdad, also known as Karakosh. Yes. And everyone just had to flee. So 70,000 Christians fled east into Erbil. Yes. Another 60,000 Christians fled north into Dohuk. Yes. And there they fled with nothing but the clothes on their backs.
And what is the support these people have? Is there any support, if I can ask this question?
Well, they're absolutely destitute. They're completely destitute. Most of them were met at checkpoints along the road as they fled by ISIS militants who took from them their cash, their jewellery, their documents. So they literally arrived in Erbil or in Dohuk with just the shorts and T-shirts they were wearing at the height of summer. They moved into monasteries and churches and shopping centres and open fields. And basically they're being cared for out of the pockets of local Christians. So the need is enormous. I mean, imagine if 100 families moved into your church hall.
It's amazing.
And your church had to feed them and clothe them. The need is huge.
But that is a social issue, and one of the reasons we discuss it today, even from social perspective, and you hinted us before, the politicians' attitude, what is it to that problem? Because it is a social problem beyond the church issue that we're going to talk later on.
Well, the first big issue is for aid. They really need aid. Yeah. And I think the new government of Iraq is seeking to build up a better army in order to fight back. ISIS and to try and regain territory. But it's not going to be very easy. ISIS controls most of Nineveh province.
And that's today. Right. Is it easy to from the Western world, how the support comes into into these Christians?
Right. Well, groups like Voice of the Martyrs,
Okay.
Open Doors,
Yes.
Barnabas Fund,
Yes.
Aid to the Church in Need, Caritas, and the group that I work for, Christian Faith and Freedom, they're raising money for Christians like this. So Christian Faith and Freedom is raising money for Dohuk,
Yes.
which is in the far north of Iraq. So it's wetter and colder and more remote. And according to the Assyrian Patriarch, the Christians there are in a really dire state.
Wow.
They're in tremendous need. I mean, they're suffering terribly. I think even beyond the fact that they need food, they need and clothing, they need to know they're not forgotten. Some people have lost even more than just their money. One family I know of has lost their daughter because ISIS took their daughter when they took their cash.
And they use the girls as well. But
yes.
Thank you for raising this subject with us. We will be back shortly after the break.
Thank you.
Thanks for staying with us. We're going to continue to see possible solutions and where can they come from. Welcome back to Natsat, and today we're going to continue the subject of persecution, specifically church persecution with Elizabeth Kendal. Elizabeth, we spoke about Iraq, which is very horrible stories in there, but how spread is this problem around the world today?
Well, it's really a global situation, and this is one thing that's sort of different, I think, in our age, because persecution's always been part of the church's history.
Yes, yes.
But one thing that's quite unusual today is the global nature of it. It's everywhere. Iraq is just one theatre of jihad.
Yes.
There's an Islamic jihad being waged in northern Nigeria that involves the kidnapping and selling off of Christian girls and the slaughter of Christians and driving them off their lands. Sudan is another theatre of jihad, where you've got the government of Sudan waging a genocidal jihad against the Christian African people of the Nuba Mountains. The government calls them the black rubbish and calls them infidels and kafir, which means unclean, and has fatwas or religious rulings saying they should be destroyed, and it kills them. So there are many theatres of jihad. Somalia is a land of martyrs. The Christian church is so small, and yet the few Christian leaders they have are executed as soon as they're found. And Al-Shabaab hunts for them and seeks to destroy them. You've got terrorist bombings in Kenya, and you've got pastors being killed in Tanzania. It's very, very widespread. And they're not all Islam either.
Iran, Syria now, and all sorts of, in Asia and Africa, but it is across the globe, isn't it?
Yes.
And from the perspective, from church point of view, and I know you have done quite a bit of research on that as well. In what areas we need to improve?
Oh, a lot of areas. I would think first and foremost in our attitudes. We have to care. I mean, churches are being bulldozed in China. Christians are locked up for life and executed in North Korea, and to a large extent, lots of churches sort of don't really care. They don't want to know because they're very comfortable. A lot of Western Christians have become very comfortable in a sort of a church as social club environment where you come together and have a nice time and we all go home feeling really uplifted. There's not a lot of room for indignation and lament and even weeping over the suffering of our brothers.
Do you think there's a theology issue as well in there?
Yes, I think there is a theology issue in there as well.
Misunderstanding the church position towards persecution?
Yes, it's a triumphalist position. Whereas persecution is real, and Jesus warned us that persecution would come. But just because Jesus said persecution will come, and that we are therefore to expect it, doesn't mean we are supposed to accept it.
Exactly. We don't welcome
it's
it,
sin,
isn't it?
It is wickedness. When Christian women are raped because they're Christians, that is sin. That is wickedness.
Exactly.
And this is the body of Christ. The church is the beloved of his soul. God grieves. That it's very clear in the scriptures that God grieves when his church grieves.
Alertness is one thing that the church needs to improve on.
Yes.
And accept this as a reality.
Yes.
And part of the discussion.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Okay. And then from that, I suppose, we'll derive more passion and support, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, every single of those Christians are God's creation, isn't it? So it is part of the body, the church body, isn't it? So alertness is one thing. In practical sense, what do you think it needs to be done?
Well, I think the world has changed.
Yes.
So the world has definitely changed, and I think we as a church need to change the way we worship even.
Yes.
Our worship needs to be, we have stop being in denial about the way the world has changed, and we have to actually confront it and embrace it and be serious about it. So we have to be serious about our giving financially. Christians will die for want of baby formula and jumpers in winter and food and medicines. We have to be serious about our giving. We have to be really serious about our intercessory prayer. A lot of churches, you've got a 90-minute service and 3 minutes of prayer.
Yes.
Well, I think people have forgotten what prayer is. Jesus died and that curtain into the temple of the Lord was ripped open. So now we can walk into the courts of the Lord and lay our requests before him. We can intercede for our brothers and sisters in the courts of the Lord. Some people think you've got to get to Barack Obama to get religious freedom. Well, no, you go over him, you forget that. We have a much higher authority who actually invites us in and actually cares and actually has the power to change things. And prayer is all part of the way he works. And Christians need to get serious about this, and churches need to get serious about it.
And what is it that those persecuted ask for?
Yeah, that is what they ask for. They ask for prayer before they ask for anything else. It's amazing. I've seen interviews with Christians whose suffering is incredible. And yet the first thing they ask for is pray for us.
That means they feel the gap of Christians do not pray for them as much as they should have.
Yeah, and they also know the power of prayer, because a lot of these Christians in countries where they're under pressure, they live their daily lives in prayer. They really do pray for their daily food, for their daily bread. Lord, give us our daily bread. We don't pray for that because we know we can go and buy it, at the supermarket. These people live a different sort of existence often. Their lives are imperiled and they know the power of prayer. You mentioned
quite a few organizations, which is a good idea for audience to go through and find out more and really to be alert of that. And prayer is something that is good for the church in general anyway, because we forgot really how to spend time on that. But having said all of that now today, I'd like to thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
To bring the topic. It's not an easy topic to talk about, and people really shy away from it rather than embracing it. But we are in a community TV. And before we close, I would like you to share with our audience your opinion, your personal opinion about the community TV.
Well, I'm a really big fan of anything that gets the message out, just like radio. And community television gives people another option. It gives them choices. If we don't have choices, we're just so limited in what we can get. And God uses these things. It's just a wonderful, wonderful vehicle.
Elizabeth, thank you for being with us in such a difficult subject.
Thank you, Paul.
And we're going to be back with Nat Chat next week at the same time.